All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Cody Cooper. I'm a sales engineer here at B9 Creations. Today, we're talking with our three renowned panelists of how to scale your model making business with 3D printing, give some secrets of success with the top model makers worldwide. You'll also get an in-depth look at our brand new HD Slate material, and we'll have a live roundtable Q&A with our panelists at the end of this webinar. Before we get started, we want to build products that meet your needs. So if you're interested in offering feedback on our hardware, software, and material launches, please become a beta tester as it shows here on the screen. You can sign up at b9c.com/beta. We do need your feedback, and we would appreciate anybody signing up. So the panelists that we have here listed will share a bit more about themselves in just a minute, but I'll introduce them to you now. We have Alan Buttler joining us from the UK with Model U. Tom Burns joins us with Poseidon Model Works. And John and Karen Boyd are with Boyd's Toys, and John is here in the US joining us today. So today we're going to learn the top takeaways from these successful model making or maker businesses utilizing 3D printing technology, how to take full advantage of today's digital tools and full control of your model making production process, how to bridge the gap from prototyping to large scale manufacturing, how the B9 Core series can quickly bring any high precision design to life, and finally, how HD Slate compares to other B9 Creations materials. So for those of you who may not know as much about our product line, we wanted to give you a little background before we jump in here. We develop 3D printing workflow solutions for businesses and work to help them incorporate the solution that fits their business needs and their bottom line. So our B9 Core series 3D printers are designed to be fast, repeatably accurate, and easy to use, so you can focus on building and scaling your business. We have a post-processing line of accessories, including our new automated B9 Clean that automatically dries or cleans parts right on the build table. So the first time you touch your part, it's clean and dry. Our B9 Model Cure that cures models in minutes here. That's another accessory. And of course, our plethora of resins here. We have an ever-expanding line of resins from our castable resins to our high-speed prototyping design and mold-making materials to our line of engineering resins like our rugged nylon 6 material. And we have just launched our HD Slate formulated for microscale parts and optimized for surface finish. More on that later, however, and please at any time chat in with any questions about our products, and if you have any questions for our panelists, please just chat in and we will answer these during the Q&A at the end of the webinar here. So with that, it's actually time for our first poll. I'm going to start that up, and then please take a minute and fill this out when you have a second. All right, so as you're filling out the polls there, we're going to move on to Alan Buttler starting us off here. So Alan, if you wouldn't mind.
Hi folks, yes, my name's Alan Buttler from Model U. Model U produce 3D printed figurines using 3D scans as the starting point. So all the figurines in the range are 3D scanned from real people. And there's a number of detailing items as well, which is a mixture of items that have been 3D scanned or items that have been drawn in CAD and then 3D printed. So I've been in business about 4 years, just over 4 years now, with 3 part-time staff, and I've been using the B9 products since 2014, which would be when I was still in my old life, working in IT, before I quit work and started doing Model U full time. So initially I started out with the V1.2 creator, which was a fantastic machine. Really, the business was based on that machine. That followed by purchasing a second one in 2015, and then last year bit the bullet and bought the Core series. So in terms of scaling, how the business changed, really, what essentially the Core printer was the piece of hardware which really allowed me to up my game big time. So the 1.2s were fantastic on detail. They helped me get a name for myself in terms of fidelity in the marketplace, which was something at that time, certainly 4 years ago, that no one else was really able to do. But as the business became more successful, the overheads of running the 1.2s became much more of an issue. So recoating vats twice a week, all the extra tasks involved in calibration and cleaning, the duration to print products, how it was hard to deliver larger scale figures because of the print time. So the Core series coming online was a major change in really in what the business and what I could achieve. A new kind of addition to that, with thanks to B9, is the cleaning unit and the curing chamber. So I think I mentioned I've got a couple of part-time staff now, so having a system such as that has really simplified the cleaning process. It's made it much quicker, much easier, much more effective. I've certainly found that the cleaning unit in particular is much more effective at cleaning hollowed figures where it's been difficult to remove resin in the internal cavities. It seems to be more successful than using an ultrasonic cleaner like I was using previously. Other takeaways from scaling the business, really, which come down to standardizing the product range. One thing I've done to really speed up job creation is creating a library of pre-sprued figurines in different scales. So importing figures into jobs is much quicker. Again, it's made it much easier for part-time staff to create and nest jobs without having to really know the product range or know the products inside out. But all that really came down to making a lot of standards, I guess, when I first started, when it was just me in a garage 4 years ago in the middle of nowhere. So things can scale when things get busy. So you kind of need to make all your workflows and procedures right as early as possible. One thing with spruing in mind, this is just another sort of takeaway really from feedback from customers, is it's really spruing your products in a way that make it easier for the customer to remove them without damaging anything, making it straightforward for them to get the tweezers in there without having to sort of maneuver around any other parts. I, as where possible, centralize the base of the sprue so they come back to one origin point for an easy snip. And then also aligning the sprues in a way that makes them easy to package, to minimize the thickness of the product as well. So certainly the new tools and the new Core Create software have made it much easier to sprue, as has using the thin supports for very fine detail. So I'm finding that I'm actually using smaller supports and actually preserving detail better. In terms of upscaling to wholesale, again, having a library of pre-sprued parts has made that so much easier. But then also the Core series, really, with the speed of the machine, has massively revolutionized what I can do compared to what I could deliver with the 1.2s. I think it's roughly 5 times faster using the grey resin over the a mix of red and cherry that I was using previously. I find that if I'm not optimizing the entire build table with one product, I'm doing them in rows essentially. So you can optimize one row of figures and then maybe get I don't know, about 100 figures into one build job. And that makes the trimming of them much, much easier. Again, when I've been trimming 3D printed figures for about 5 years now, but I've got staff that have just joined that have never seen a 3D printed figure in their life, and it kind of makes it much easier for them to trim. I've only just started using Slate, but for what I can say already is that, and I think you can see on the images on the slide there, they're unprimed figures, and the smaller ones are about 2 centimeters tall. So the finest detail on there is in the, I don't know, 0.05 of a mil, 50 microns perhaps. The feedback on the Slate material from my customers and my wholesale companies that I provide to has been unanimously positive. For me as a producer, it has the almost as fast as the grey prototype in resin. A key thing is it has the flexibility of the red and cherry materials, but it has the an unbelievable surface finish, and especially being matte as well for model makers, it means there's less reliance on coating the figures in primer. So that was one of my main, I guess, not complaints, but observations by customers, was by using the red material meant that they were having to use more paint to coat it. So they were losing detail in the process. Whereas the Slate material is ready to paint straight away once they're cleaned, and certainly using the curing chamber and the cleaning unit together, the quality of the product is just, it's basically re-energized my entire product range just by changing the print material, which is pretty good for me. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers anything, unless anyone's got any specific questions, which I can refer to later in the Q&A or.
Yes, actually, you mentioned the wholesale orders. Can you clarify just how many parts are in your wholesale orders, and then how did you land those customers?
Yeah, so at the moment, just had a meeting with one wholesaler this morning who pretty much want the entire range, which is about, ignoring scales at the moment, so actual products which can be produced in about 10 different scales is probably about 600, and they're available in about 15 different scales. I generally only hold stock of the 2 most popular scales, and the rest is available on print on demand or print to order. So the wholesale connections that I've had so far generally just deal in the popular scales, as you would imagine. But this will be the first time I'm actually doing print on demand for wholesale as well, which would be interesting. The way I landed those really was, it really comes back to the V1.2s and how certainly within the model railway market, there was anything remotely like what I was able to produce with the 1.2s at the time. So very fortunately was able to get a name for myself quite quickly, thanks to meeting a number of key model makers that worked at an adult college that I was participating in as a student. That was a college which taught you how to make models in etch brass or laser cutting, and they were just adding 3D printing to their syllabus. Also, to be honest, just a lot of groundwork. So I was doing 30 exhibitions a year in the first few years, and just getting all around the UK and really showing the product, chatting to people, help dispelling a few myths, saying what 3D printing was still suitable for, what it wasn't suitable for. Also talking about the limitations of 3D scanning and where CAD design actually might be a more viable or cheaper alternative. So it really was a lot of hands-on, face-to-face, driving up and down the country. And then as the product started to, I guess, become more prominent, the figures were starting to appear in magazines, in reviews, exhibitions all over the country. So it kind of sort of snowballed from there, really. But yeah, I've certainly been very fortunate, but there's no doubt that the B9 hardware definitely set me apart from not necessarily the competition, but really anything that had been done previously in more traditional methods.
Very nice. In a previous conversation, you had told us that one of the wholesale orders was over like 2,000 parts. Could you talk a little bit about that and that level of additive manufacturing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so that was one of the first larger scale projects I did, I guess. So this is a company that make model railway locomotives, and they're quite a forward-thinking company. They use a lot of new techniques, and they've got some very, very high quality injection molded products, which they produce on a large scale. But what they wanted was to kind of add a bit of value to that product by getting me to design bespoke figures specifically for those items. So as I say, like my major market is the model railway market. So more often than not, the figures in the range are people that actually do the role that they're portrayed to do. So that company were able to send me the CAD artwork for the cabs and for the controls on the locomotive. I was able to visit the real thing and talk to people who actually drove them, and using a combination of the CAD drawings and the real locomotive, essentially create a jig, a full-size jig where I could 3D scan the driver or the fireman in the poses most natural to the job that they do day to day. Once those were signed off, it was purely then a simple task of just discussing how many figures I could get out in a batch. And because we were talking in thousands by that time, that meant I could most optimally nest the build table. So I think I could get 70 to 80 figures out of a build job. Actually, at that time, I was still using 2 creators, so that was a challenge. If I'd got a core, I could have probably done it in a fifth of the time. But back then, it was just recoating the vats and just cracking on, printing the jobs out. Well, I think I did it in 48 hours or something like that. But yeah, it was a lot of work.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine. This would speed it up quite a bit with the core for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and to be honest, until I had the core, I was still looking for that type of work, but it had to fit in with website sales, my exhibition sales, and really dedicating the machines to a job like that was a challenge. But now with the core, it's a no-brainer now, and I think I've got 5 or 6 contracts like that now.
That's awesome. All right. So we know that part of your business, you'd mentioned that you're scanning actual like real people. Can you share with our attendees how you carved out that niche selection in your industry there?
Yeah, sure. So pretty much everything I've done has come from me doing it as a hobby, really, as a pastime. And I was looking at 3D scanning back in 2013, I think, and it was 2014 before I purchased a scanner, really just to sort of see what it would do. That combined with the 1.2 and just the fortune really of living about 2 miles away from one of the best model makers in the country, who was able to give me feedback on what I was producing. And I think at the time I just 3D scanned a few friends and printed them out and was showing them around. And really the business really went from there. Just a lot of very fortunate contacts at the time that were very, very helpful to me.
Awesome. And then with that, we had that conversation about how you'd been featured on a documentary. Is that correct? With the Showtime and the Great British Baking Show there? Yeah.
So the Showtime thing came about. There's a museum here in the UK which has I think it's a scale mile of Oxfordshire countryside in the 1930s. So it's a vast diorama, really, I guess. And it's held in high regard. It's been there about 40 years, and it's constantly being worked on, constantly being added to and developed. And certainly within the UK, it is pretty much the sort of pinnacle of modelling. So I was very grateful to be asked to assist in providing figures for that and 3D scanning people in 1930s clothing and depicting various roles within that scene. Unrelated to that, a documentary about the band XTC was being planned, and XTC are from the next town from where this museum is, and the lead singer is quite eccentric, I guess, was very much into lead figurines, military figures, Napoleonic figures, toys, all sorts of stuff, and they thought it would be an interesting take to 3D scan the band and have them filmed in miniature within this diorama. So that was early last year. It's quite an interesting project in so much the band wouldn't get together for me to scan them, so I had to go and visit them individually.
Oh gosh.
And they were all printed out actually in the same scale as they're on the image, the smaller ones. That went out in the UK, and then I think the rights were sold to Showtime, so it was showed in Canada and the US, and now I think it's airing in South America as well.
That is too cool.
Yeah, it was a good, really, really cool project, that one.
Very nice. So you mentioned with some of the model making in terms of military and aviation there, how did HD Slate prepare you to enter those markets?
Yeah, Slate definitely is. I think where the figures have got less prep, and you really need to be able to see the detail before you've even done anything. So I think that what I've found from my sort of investigations of the military markets is there's with model railways, the existing figures in that marketplace are generally white metal, hand carved, and then cast in white metal. So there isn't that pre-existing level of quality there that there is within the military and aviation modeling markets, because pretty much everything's injection molded or designed in CAD and then resin cast. So HD Slate forms part of a two-pronged attack, really, to sort of tackle those markets. The second one being using an Artec EVA scanner to get super high resolution figurines. Super high resolution scans. So really the Slate material is, I would say, is the first material that can really make the most of the detail that type of scanner can capture. So that's something that I'm just sort of starting to experiment with.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Alan. That was just an awesome story. It's really cool to see how our users are moving from prototyping to additive manufacturing in like large scales, and that end use production in your wholesale orders is just really cool to see.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think we're going to go over to Tom Burns. Tom, we'd love to hear your story.
Great. Thanks. Well, I'll first say a quick bit about myself and how I ended up starting a model making business, and then talk briefly about my experience with high resolution printing and using custom materials on B9 printers. My professional background is as a naval architect and marine engineer for the offshore energy industry. And the basic takeaway from this is that I sometimes tend to be overly technically inclined and that I really like ships. I am the creator of Poseidon Model Works, which is a print-on-demand model-making company that specializes in small-scale ship miniatures. And my target customer base is comprised mainly of wargamers and miniature ship model collectors. I'm currently finalizing development of my initial batch of production models, and I'm hoping to have them available for sale via a dedicated web shop later this year. Now, starting a model making company has been something of an evolution for me. I've been a tabletop wargamer since I was a kid, but about 10 years ago, I decided to jump into miniatures-based naval wargaming. And for those who are not familiar, this involves playing with very small-scale ship models on a large table or on the floor, typically in 1 to 2400 or 1 to 3000 scale. And to give you an idea of size, the largest of these are roughly 2 to 3 inches long. And I think the slide there gives a pretty good illustration relative to the penny of how big we're talking about. I found that I was not happy with the quality of most of the miniatures that were available at the time. Most of the models on the market then were still old school hand sculpted cast metal with fairly limited detail. And so I ultimately just decided to make my own. This was basically the genesis of what has now become Poseidon Model Works. My intention from the beginning was to use print-on-demand direct manufacturing to eliminate the inherent limitations and compromises of producing models via a casting process. This makes it feasible to produce a level of detail that would be really impossible using traditional methods. Affordable high-quality web-based 3D printing services were sort of fortuitously just appearing on the scene about then. So I started creating and testing my own miniatures through Shapeways, which many of you have probably heard of. 3D printing did prove to be a very good match for my models, but I sort of quickly became very frustrated by the design restrictions, the file size limits that they were imposing. So it became pretty clear that I needed to bring 3D printing capability in-house. So after a good bit of research, I settled on a benign creator, and it was an excellent choice. In conjunction with some custom resin mixes, which I'll talk about here in a minute, my creator allowed an order of magnitude improvement in the level of detail I was able to achieve previously. I pushed the limits of this printer's capabilities pretty hard, and I continue to be astounded at what's been possible. The wow factor really never goes away. Now, the Creator is a great machine, but it does involve some effort to run and keep tightly calibrated. It was very well suited for my initial low volume development work, but for volume production, I needed a machine where tight consistency and reproducibility is really the default rather than the goal. So my model operation is thus now centered around a Core 530, which has allowed for optimization of model production for volume printing, provides much improved speed, and allows for standardization of interchangeable model parts. This was always a problem with the Creator because things would change just a little bit every time you recoded the vat, you recalibrated, so it was hard for parts to be truly interchangeable on a very small scale. I'm also using a B9 model cure unit for UV post-curing, which has also been a big help. One of the nice things about a practical print-on-demand setup for producing models for sale is it eliminates the cost and the complexity of casting, minimizes the inventory you have to keep on hand, and it allows multiple variants of models with minimal additional production effort. And that's a very nice thing to be able to offer customers. For what I do, producing historical ship miniatures, if you've got a particular ship that you want to show in date X versus date Y, it's typically not a huge effort, assuming that the changes weren't that great, to produce such a model. Whereas if you're having to create masters and cast them, it becomes cost prohibitive. And this is really an important feature for a small niche business like mine. Now, from the beginning, I've constantly tried to push the envelope regarding how much detail I can achieve in my models on a practical level. And from my own experience, there are a few basic physical factors that need to be considered in order to produce superior results with very high resolution, high detail models on an SLA type printer like the B9 printers. The first of these is Z-bleed. Using a very thin layer thickness allows for fine detail, but it can be prone to suffering Z-bleed, where light bleeds through the current layer to expose additional unwanted resin beyond that. What it does, that tends to make some features a little bit thicker. You can get a little bit of clumpiness. Holes tend to fill up a little bit. And many of my models, as you can see from the photos here, have moving parts, and the tolerances are very sensitive to this issue. So that was a very high priority for me. Another consideration is detail size. There's a limit to how thin freestanding details can be, both in terms of handling and what can survive the printing process. And through the system I've set up, which I'll go into in a bit, I can actually reliably print small wire-like features down to 0.1 millimeter in width. Durability is also an important feature. The overall model has to be able to withstand a reasonable amount of general handling without breaking. That's not just the handling of whoever's creating it, it's the end user as well. If it breaks, half an hour into use, it doesn't do them much good. Warpage is also something you have to deal with. Models have to be designed to avoid small defects that are related to the inherent properties of the resin, such as deformations around bottom supports, for example, and that'll differ depending on the resin that's being used. And to minimize warpage during the post-curing process. What I find sometimes with some resins is that if the model is not properly and rigidly enough supported, they can warp a bit when you do the final UV post-curing. Now, I think the key starting point for addressing all of these factors is the choice of resin. It's crucially important. I initially experimented with a number of B9 and third-party resins on the Creator, but I ultimately settled on B9 Black when it became available, based on the durability, the minimal warpage, and the crispness of the details that you see. At thin layer thicknesses, though, the B9 Black does exhibit some Z-bleed. While this might not be very noticeable on a typical user print, the nature of my models means it does make a significant difference. So my solution was to add additional pigment to the B9 Black. This reduces the Z-bleed by making the resin more opaque to the light, so less bleeds through with every layer that's exposed. After considerable experimentation with various pigment ratios, material settings, I was eventually able to arrive at a custom resin mix that produced consistent, outstanding results. The only real downsides compared to using the stock resins really is the hassle of having to precisely mix up the pigment for each new batch, and that it really is kind of important. And you need to stir the resin between prints because the pigment does have a tendency to settle out over time. Now, when I started to consider an upgrade to the core series, a primary concern was to maintain the quality of these results that I've been getting on the Creator with my custom resin. And one of the nice things about the Creator is that all the settings are open, and they're user adjustable, which makes it very easy to experiment. Core series is a bit more of a closed environment, I think due in part to the risk of the expensive Durvat being damaged by errant user settings. Users are initially limited to the factory settings for a given stock resin. But after discussion with folks at B9 regarding my concerns around an upgrade, they kindly invited me to participate in beta testing for their new B9 Captivate software, which I really appreciated. Captivate, for those who are not familiar with it, is a plug-in module for the Core Series printer that allows users to create custom material setting files to support third-party resins and modifications to the B9 stock factory settings. After a few weeks of testing on the Core 530, I was able not only to replicate the results I've been obtaining previously on the Creator, but I was actually able to noticeably improve them. I was quite happy and surprised by that. I really could not achieve my present quality of output without the combination of the Core 530 and Captivate to allow me to use these custom mixes. There are a few other minor points that I thought might be of interest to model makers, so I'll throw it out here. First, the slicing software, both for the Creator and for the Core series, does not require that all the shells in an STL input file be joined together into a single shell. This is really a big deal in terms of time savings if you're building complicated CAD models. In fact, I have models with several hundred individual shells that have been sliced without any hiccups. When you're particularly when you're doing testing and you're making frequent changes to a model and printing, making changes and printing to test it, not having to go back and reunify all of the shells is a huge savings in time. I also find that the software is pretty tolerant of small mesh problems that you typically will end up with an STL file, particularly after you've merged a few shells together. There's typically with the B9 software, there's no need to spend a lot of extra time stamping out every little glitch. I've yet to have a major problem with little minor issues. I'll also say that for anybody who's thinking about experimenting with custom materials, I highly recommend that you maintain a detailed log of your testing as you go. This really can be invaluable in trying to work out problems that will arise as you dial in the correct settings. It really is very useful to be able to go back and say, well, that print I did, 10 prints ago, how was this particular setting set? How did it turn out? And it really speeds things up. I'll conclude here just by putting in a good word for the outstanding level of support the crew at B9 have consistently provided to me over the last few years. Like I say, they really go the extra mile to resolve any troublesome issues that come up, and they are really very responsive to user feedback. If you've got ideas, suggestions, things you want to see, I really encourage people to contact them because they do listen, and it does get incorporated in the products. And you really can see that in the core series. As someone who spent a lot of time with the creator, when I first started using the 530, I can't tell you how many times I would do something and notice, oh, wow, they fixed that. Some little minor annoyance on the creator that had already been dealt with on the 530. So they had already thought through the problem and dealt with it. It really, the 530 is a fantastic piece of equipment on that level. So I just like to say thank you, guys. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much. You've helped us out so much, and we're happy to be there to support you in your business, and that's awesome to hear. Thank you. Well, we did want to ask. Why did you decide to bring production in-house with the core series before launching your online shop? We had talked about that before.
Well, I mean, it comes down to mainly reproducibility. Having consistency from print to print when you're dealing with very, very small parts really is important. If every time you do a print, it's oh so very slightly different, that means you really can't mix and match parts at all. So any model you print, like for example, the ships in the slide here that have freely rotating turrets, those would have to be printed at the same time as the base model. And if you try to print them separately, they may not fit. So that really was an important consideration. Speed also was a consideration. That being able to print faster when you're doing direct digital production really is a real help. Awesome.
Yeah, the consistency and repeatability definitely would help in that scenario, especially with how small your parts are here. Also, can you talk more about the benefits of printing in-house versus the use of companies like Shapeways, which you mentioned earlier there?
Well, I mean, there are two. I'll say there are two levels of outside vendors that you can deal with. The first level is an outfit like Shapeways, where they're aiming for a mass market of customers, and they're dealing with a large volume of prints. And honestly, I think it's a bit of a nightmare on their end in terms of controlling the quality of their prints. So what they do to deal with that is they put sometimes fairly onerous restrictions on what you can do in designing your models, in terms of how small details can be, how fiddly they can be, how fragile, file size. So when you're designing models like I do, you very quickly start running into some walls. And I had quite a bit of direct conversations with their tech people behind the scenes, and we just never could properly resolve that. You really need to have the ability to do it yourself, or have someone with the same type of equipment as I have in-house that knows how to get the best of it. The second level is a professional service bureau that certainly can produce quality that you might need. But if you're trying to produce prints in volume, it quickly becomes very, very expensive, and is really sort of not viable if you're trying to use this as a production method. If you're creating masters that you're then casting from, that it's maybe a bit of a different proposition. But in terms of doing direct on-demand printing, it's really not feasible cost-wise.
All right, thank you for sharing that, and yeah, thank you for all the information you provided to our audience here. Tom is just a great example of how we try and listen to our customers and meet their needs with new products. And as Tom mentioned earlier, he was a tester, or a beta tester for B9 Captivate, our material development software there. And he's been instrumental in helping us think about HD Slate and meeting that really high resolution, and has just offered a lot of great feedback. So thanks again, Tom.
You're most welcome, guys.
Yep. With that, I think we're going to move on to our last panelist, John Boyd here. John, can you start us off?
Sure. After Tom and Alan, I pretty much could say ditto, me too. So a little bit about ourselves, or myself. I've been in traditional printing, digital and lithography for the last 30 years. I've been married for 25 years. We have 4 kids. One of my sons has Down syndrome. And me and my wife sat down and said, how can we start a business or an opportunity that would give him the ability to integrate and participate, rather than, a menial job or some kind of redundant job he could do. So in about 2014, we got exposed to 3D printing. It was more FDM printing. But it was really mesmerizing to see something materialize from a concept to a finished product right before your eyes. So as my son got ready to graduate high school in 2016, I talked to my wife. I said, hey, let's look at 3D printing and what opportunities that can present for us to create some boutique products in the miniature wargaming market, just like the 2 other panelists have kind of alluded to or talked about. And, maybe we can produce some products that, people would find to fill holes in their lines, or, give them some unique figures. And 3D printing really kind of facilitated that. Initially, we started working on our product. We paired up with a designer, Francesco Piazzo, and he's out of Italy, does fantastic designs for us. He's been working with us for about 3 years, he uses a ZBrush and Blender, and really gave us the ability to start making some custom designs and figures. Once we reached the manufacturing point where we had to decide, okay, how are we going to deliver these to market? Initially, just like the other gentleman, we tried outsourcing. I went to some professional outsourcing groups because, the detail on our miniatures, the ones in the screen right now are like 32 millimeters from the feet to the eyes. But our line initially started with 15 millimeter, which were very tiny. They're about the size of a dime. And, just like the ship models, they have a lot of really fine detail and things that needed to be represented. You can't have a face without a nose, or, some of the other finer details that are required to make that figure look correctly. After outsourcing about 3 times and getting a bill for about $1,000, I looked at my wife and said, okay, maybe it's time for us to look at investing into a 3D printer. I gave myself an outlandish budget of about $4,000 and said, we can find something in that category that should be able to meet our needs. We went to the market. We spent about 4 months looking at product. And one of the companies we came across was B9 Creations, and we looked at the B9 Creator as well. The buying experience was really good. That was one of the things that struck us was, how interested B9 was in our process and what we were doing, and helping us get samples and look at what the machines were capable of and the different resins that they offered. At that time, we decided to go with a different product, but ironically, some of the same challenges that the other two gentlemen faced with their creator. The printer we went with was very slow to perform. A single miniature would take anywhere from 4 to 8 hours to print out. We were constantly calibrating the printer. Anytime you moved it, nudged it, any kind of manipulation at all, you had to recalibrate the product. Because we deal with multi-piece models where there's a lot of keys, arms, legs, weapons, wings, halos, all that stuff has to buckle in and fit properly. Geometric accuracy was a big problem. If I printed it at the same time, it wasn't an issue, but a lot of times something will change, or you need to reprint a piece, and if the pieces don't fit together, that became a real nuisance and problem. There was also a lot of other maintenance items on the printer, like replacing the build trays, the build plate, the film. The film had to be stretched a specific way. The resin tank, we were using a pretty aggressive high definition resin that would actually dissolve the tanks. So after about 7 months of that process, we decided, okay, we need to step up and really identify a professional grade printer. So this time we increased the budget to about $25,000 and said, all right, let's go to market and see what we can find available in this price category. We talked to every major manufacturer. We got samples. There were some beautiful samples, some great products. But every product kind of left us with a little bit of a problem. Maybe one, they didn't have a resin or a material that was resilient enough for what we're trying to do. Maybe we weren't getting service or responses from the manufacturer. Several manufacturers kind of made us feel second-class citizens when we were talking to them. We're a small startup company. So that was a little bit of an issue for us. Now, because we had such a great buying experience from B9 or looking at the creative, but we didn't buy it, I told my wife, I said, let's call B9 and look at this brand new core product that they're releasing. And this was like in November of 2016. And when we talked to the guys, again, the customer experience was extraordinary. They really talked through our problems. We talked about our challenges. We got new samples. The person we talked to was the same person we had talked to 2.5 years earlier. And that was something that kind of meant something to us. She kind of remembered the conversation and rekindled that relationship pretty quickly. We got samples back. The printer that we were looking at for about $25,000 didn't have half the capabilities that the Core series was offering as far as speed, performance, non-calibration, media variety. I could use their resins, or I could use my own resins. We do use some third-party resins in ours because up until the Slate was released, we needed a high-def resin. And so we had one that's about $300 a liter, and we really wanted to make sure that we were getting the best quality we could. So they are, again, B9 just did an outstanding job, and we just decided that the Core was the way we wanted to go. We ended up getting a 530 and a 550. As the other gentleman mentioned, they've constantly improved the product since we've received it, and it's doing just an outstanding job. They just flashed up our kind of how we have ours laid out. So we have the 530 and the 550. We use the Clean, which was, to me personally, was a life-changing device. Just like most model makers, you have little tanks and vats, and you shake and you scrub, and I use the Sonic cleaner, and just never could get what I considered a satisfactory result. But more importantly, when we start producing boutique-type products where we're selling them on demand, like some of the other gentlemen we're talking about, we got to be able to clean things efficiently. And I also got to be able to trust whoever's operating the equipment. So being able to produce, 4 to 16 figures, depending on what size they are, and turn them around quickly so that they're clean and reproducible, it was very, very important. So currently we manufacture in 3 different ways. We do high pressure resin casting in-house. We have professional grade pumps and vacuum chambers and pressure chambers for that. We're about to release 80 products that are going to be produced in white metal, or 10. And we use the Core series to create the masters for that. They were just sent off, and we've had master copies made for all those products. We're in the process of having production molds made now. So And then the final process we want to do is on demand because of what the market that we're in, we want to be able to offer a lot of variety and customizations, even of our own product line. We like to be able to do products that represent our figures but are in unique poses for collectability purposes and uniqueness. One of the things we really like to do is take it another step forward because one of the, I think it was Alan talked about employees, was we like to keep our head count down to a minimum. And the core series really allows us to do that by saving our jobs and reprinting them and the repeatability of it. But we really like to get to a fully automated system where we print our files over, have the machine print them, move them to a cleaning station, and then ultimately have them ready for us to desprue and package and send off. We see that as kind of our ultimate goal on where we'd like to be with our product. Any questions?
None from us currently here. And yeah, I just want to say thank you for sharing that, John. And Boyd's Toys has always been a great example for beta testing the B9 Clean unit, and we've gotten some great feedback from you all. And so they needed a workflow solution that not only included some fast printing, but more painless post processing, as you'd mentioned before, with consistent cleaning there. So thank you for being a part of that. That being said, I think we're going to move on to the next poll here. So I'm going to start this next poll. If you can, let's see, start another, I'm moving on to the next poll. I'm launching it right now. There we go. So take a few seconds to do that. Okay. As we move from 3D printing to additive manufacturing, we have automation firmly on the product makeup or roadmap. Sorry. All right. So now if you take some time to fill that out, we're going to go into the HD Slate here. So you've heard from our panelists how they're using HD Slate. This material was formulated for high detail microscale parts where customers have thin walls and features. Not only do these parts not need to be printed before they're painted, but the resin was also formulated to have no Z-bleed, so every feature has super crisp and readability there. This material was also optimized for surface finish, and the precise detail is great for molding and model making, no matter what industry you're in. You can, it's paintable, it's easy to work with models for sure. And we would love to hear your thoughts and any questions that you have about our new material in this in the Q&A here. So we're going to open this up to the panelist Q&A, and if you have any questions, please send it into the chat, and we'll get those answered for you. Okay, so we have some questions coming in right now. So Tom and John, since you've both outsourced before, can you talk about the turnaround time and design iterations with outsourcing versus in-house there?
Well, in my experience, the speed is going to be a function of how much money you are willing to throw at the problem. The faster you need to turn around, the more expensive it's going to be, obviously. It really, if you're trying to do iterative development of a model, it really becomes a bit awkward to go to an outside source to do that. It takes too long, even on an expedited basis, because typically you're not the only customer they're dealing with. There are other people in line, and they're not standing by their printer waiting for you to send the file to print it. So that can be a bit problematic.
Definitely. And how about you, John, with your side there?
Yeah, absolutely. Outsourcing was one of the challenges that really drove us to bring it in-house. And, the reason is we know our product. We know what we're looking at. We know the details that we're looking for. And very often we come back when people de-sprue stuff, they cut things off, or when they set up the support, something wouldn't get printed. And a third-party end user doesn't necessarily notice those fine details that you immediately pick up on and go, where's this piece, or why is this not printed correctly? And honestly, because they don't have ownership or investment into that product, it's not surprising that they miss those things. And you're looking at least a week turnaround. So back to what he just keyed in on, a lot of this printing is for testing. Does it fit? Does it look right? Does it fit on the base? Does it have the right diameters and dimensions that we're looking for? So outsourcing does become very impractical very quickly if you're serious about iterative process, or just tight deadlines.
Definitely. It's good to have your parts in hand and able to make that quick turnaround and updating the iterations there. So awesome. John, we actually have another question for you. What is the main difference between the 530 and 550, and what are the advantages of both those machines that you see?
Initially, we went with both because the 530, the increased resolution for the type of things we were printing. Like I said, the first figures we were printing were 15 millimeter, which are extremely small. And again, I still needed faces and noses and things like that. The 550 was capable of printing them, but there was a little bit of a variation initially. What we've seen with the Slate, it's actually kind of flipped on us a little bit. Using the high definition Slate, the 550 at the 20 micron level is giving us output that we just, for some reason, like a little bit better than what we've been getting on some of our 530 settings. The 530 is still excellent, and it's given us good results. Speed is another factor. The 550 prints a little bit faster, and when we're dealing with production or iterative runs, again, every 10 minutes counts. We've gotten probably 600 cycles on these machines, and the ability to print 4 or 5 times in a day versus 1 time is a big advantage.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that. When you're doing development, particularly when you're printing little test pieces to check things, it really is helpful to be able to do many prints in a single day. It moves things along much faster. For me, the 530 was absolutely a question of resolution. That said, I still have my creator available in the event that I need to print something that has a larger volume than the 530 can handle. But I'll have to say, in the 6 months or so since I've had the 530, I have not had need to use it that way.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you both for.
Let me add one more thing to that. The 530, I'm only capable typically of getting a single figure and maybe some parts at a time. The 550, I can run as many as 3 figures at a time in there. So again, about the speed and productivity, if the quality is comparable, I'm definitely getting a lot more productivity out of the 550.
I can just add to that myself as well, because I just have a 550, but I've still got the 2 1.2s online. One of them set at 50 microns and one of them at 30. But certainly with the HD Slate and the 550, I've found that I've stopped using the 30 micron configured 1.2 as well, because the extra build volume and the quality of the print is really outperforming for what I do.
Fantastic. And actually, perfect timing, Alan. We got another question for you as well. So do you feel that HD Slate has increased cleaning time in the B9 Clean? We have a customer that's noticed a difference between resins. Some are easier to wash, and was wondering if they adjust the cleaning time for model size or just Slate in general.
Yeah, I would agree with that, actually. I think I first noticed that the amount of sort of resin that drips off the prints once the print has finished in the machine, the Slate material seems to be sort of stick on the print more, so that would translate to, yes, it does need more cleaning. I found that the gray and the green do a lot more resin drips off of the prints, but certainly the the B9 Clean will definitely handle that. But yes, I have noticed a difference there.
All right, thank you for answering that for them. Now, Tom, we got one more for you here. How do you set up supports for your models and use nesting to maximize build table usage and make it easier and more intuitive for people to remove supports?
Well, I create my own supports in the CAD software. I actually use Rhino to build the CAD models, and one of the reasons for doing that, other than just having the precision level of control, is that when I do a production print run, I actually sprue these up so that they're stacked vertically. So rather than running, 5 different print runs, one level each, I'll stack them all up and let them go overnight. It makes it a bit more efficient in terms of the prep time and the cleanup. So that mandates, because the B9 software doesn't really allow you to do that. It sort of mandates creating supports on your own. You do have to be careful, particularly with very small models like I create, in setting up detail supports so that they can be easily removed by the end user. You have to really give some thought to how they're positioned, because it's not at all hard to get supports in place that it's just impossible for somebody to remove without breaking something.
All right, perfect. And actually, we could ask Alan the same question there, if you wouldn't mind chiming in as well. Do you need a repeat on that, Alan, or?
Yes, if you wouldn't mind. Yeah, I'm just reading that last question that's come through as well.
All right. Yeah. How do you set up your supports for models and use nesting to maximize the build table usage there?
Yeah. Okay. So I briefly sort of touched on this previously, but something I learned from the very beginning really was I think initially I was removing supports before I was packaging them, and it probably took me about a year to really transfer that task to my customers. I think as the business got busier, and it was just way too much time to do it. So I generally think in terms of how those supports are going to be removed, where possible, combine the bases of the supports to the same point, so that can be snipped with one snip to minimize the number of times a tool is needed to be used on the product. Certainly with 3D printed figures or figurines, that there isn't a huge amount of detail. So in a lot of cases, the base support can be snipped, and then the sprue can literally be pinged away by hand. I have found that the thin support function in the Create software has helped considerably to minimize the number of supports that have to come back to the base of the print. So I found that really useful.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Now, this is a question for all our panelists here. Roughly how many prints do our panel guests print per month? And then have they ever needed to repair or replace the machine, the core series?
Okay, I can go in there first if you like. Rough calculation, I think it's, depending on my exhibition schedule, it can be anything from 30 to 60, I would say. Print jobs a month. Certainly in the spring and autumn, it's probably heading more towards the 60 mark to produce stock for the exhibitions, and then also wholesale orders as well. So I probably see that going up, and that's just on one 550 at the moment. I have had a 550 replaced, and what I would say the best thing about that scenario was it just showed how amazing the support level is with B9 and with iMaker, who was a distributor in the UK. So I had a loan machine within 24 hours, if I remember rightly, and the machine came back from the US about 10 days later. So that's also shipping to the UK as well from Rapid City. So the experience there was I just felt immensely well looked after, and in exceptionally good hands. So yeah, I've certainly no worries at all about the amazing level of support, really, right from the very beginning when I started in 2014.
Fantastic. John, Tom, did you have anything to add on that too?
Yeah, I will real quick. I have about 600 cycles on mine, each. I have a 550 and a 530. That's about 50 prints a month. Like I said, they're like 32 millimeter figures, so they take up a reasonable amount of the build platform. Since I set them up and we started using them, I haven't moved them. I haven't calibrated them. I haven't, because there's not a need to do that. I have had absolutely no issues with the product. One of my concerns or apprehensions when I first looked at the core was the DuraTray itself and the cost to replace it. I am still using the original DuraTrays. The machine comes with two, and which I was really happy with. Two of them they've never left the box. I'm still using the first two. And one of the DuraTrays we dedicated to a third-party resin that was extremely aggressive. It actually ate the plastic resin trays on some other products. The DuraTray it's been exclusively used in the DuraTray. We've had no problems. It's worked great. There's no degradation on it. I've just been amazingly pleased with how well everything's worked on it. And the support's been fantastic.
That's too cool to hear. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So any more comments on this?
Sure, I'll just chime in quickly. My printer usage kind of varies depending on where I am in my development cycle. There are periods where I'm using it quite heavily, and other periods where I'm focused more on the CAD work, where I'm not using it as much. But I've had no hardware issues whatsoever with my printer thus far. I've had a few minor software issues, but that really was related to the plug-in and in particular the beta testing phase of Captivate. But in terms of the production machine, no, it's been quite smooth.
Fantastic. All right. I think we got one more or another question here. All right. How many panelists found the pricing of their own products with their customers? A lot of this customer here's the current customers would be reluctant to remove the sprue. Any suggestions that don't involve removing the sprue? And they're out of New Zealand. Let's see. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Please, any comments on that?
I can comment a little bit on that. My models, because of the nature of them, the fragility of some of the details, I actually use the spruing process in part to protect certain details on the model. It's both used to support some features, but it also helps protect others. So there's some bits of the supports that I will typically remove myself, but the others are intended to be removed by the end user.
I can add to that as well. Yeah, I use a similar process to Tom, where some supports are there actually as the role that they're determined for, but also I do have some in there to protect finer detail within the packaging. Generally, if I'm feeling generous, I'll remove some sprues, but I think a lot of work has gone into getting feedback from customers and seeing what sort of tools they prefer to use, and also educating customers on how to remove sprues. Like some have tried using knives and craft knives, which are a little bit more unpredictable than a pair of flat-sided cutters, for example. So in my experience, I did feel that it was a big step, like transferring that role to the customer, but possibly this might be slightly different in the model railway market, but my customers are model makers generally, so they're used to doing something to the product. So certainly previously they would have been used to cleaning flash off of white metal figures, or they would have been used to gluing parts and removing the pips left by sprues removed from injection molded figures or whatever. So there was some element of expectation that the product wouldn't be completely ready to be used out of the box. Obviously that's the that would be the nice to have, but in terms of throughput of prints and practicality, then I believe you do need to have some supports on there.
Alan, do you feel the need to provide any kind of instructions to the customer for how to remove some of these supports that you leave on?
Yes, I have done that. Yeah, and also a little bit on a little bit of education on the fact that the prints don't need washing, because I think that's another thing that I've come across, is that customers have almost by default started to scrub them in the sink, thinking they've got a release agent on them or something like that. So it's part of the kind of educating process of getting people used to using high fidelity 3D printed parts. So it's just something I've added to the packaging, just with a little bit of an overview of the fact that the prints are cleaned, how to remove the sprues, recommendations on primer and what types of paints can be used.
And this is John. On our products, we're kind of 50-50. You know, we've actually got a lot of our products that we have such fine supports on it. They break away quite easily. But we do have some that we send out with the sprues still on them, depending on, you know, the need of the requirement of the customer. Packaging and shipping is another factor for us. And we ship stuff all over the world. So the more compact we can make the figure without the sprues, that helps with the shipping cost.
All right, perfect. Now we're running short on time. We got time for one last question, but any questions we didn't get to, we will respond via email right after the webinar. You can always email us at any time at info@b9c.com. But the last question directed at Alan, but feel free to answer any of the panelists here. What kind of requirements should model makers look at when looking at 3D printers in terms of materials and otherwise?
Yeah, I can take you through the process that I went through, really. I mean, and also I did look at the marketplace before I decided to buy the core, just to see what else had happened out there. Big thing for me, obviously, quality is a key factor, but with the sort of throughput of printing that I'm using, usability and in terms of reading through the marketing sort of spiel and finding out what does it actually take to run one of these machines every single day, every month for years, and whether recalibration is a factor, what the ongoing costs are for VAT recoating or other sort of sundries that you need. That certainly for using it as a business, like detail is generally going to be something that's going to be quite obvious to sort of find out. People are more than happy to send samples, but for me it's really like what is the day-to-day reality of running a machine and really pushing it to its limits. Obviously you guys at B9 and the core and the thought process that went into designing the core to make it into a self-calibrated calibrate once machine just completely set it apart from the competition, because from running two 1.2s for 3 years or whatever, I'm quite accustomed to putting a lot of time into keeping the machines running at their best. So the amount of time that frees up is just absolutely invaluable.
I'll second that. Detail is really important, but the usability really is crucial in a volume printing situation. It's hard to quantify the amount of time you end up saving by not having to deal with all of the little things that cumulatively just suck enormous amounts of time. The difference between the Creator, which was more of an experimental machine, I think, and the Core series is just night and day.
All right. Any other comments on that, or just about good?
The only thing I would add to that is when we did our evaluation, we look at everything in total cost of operation. You know, what does it cost for me to get a piece out, and what can I remarket that piece for? And the guys have already hit on soft dollar cost, and that's basically, you know, what is the time does it take to get it up and running? If it only takes an hour to print, but it takes me 2 hours to set up, that's not efficient workflow. So, you know, the Core is such an efficient machine, such a frazzle-free machine, and does such excellent output. The cost per unit, even when using a higher cost resin, is just so effective. It just makes complete sense.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much. This has been fantastic having you be able to share some of this information with everybody. please, and thank you all for the attendees coming here. If you're interested in receiving an HD Slate sample designed by Simon Percival here, who is in this webinar now, and thank you to Simon. He produced the sample shown on the screen here, and we can get you one of those to check out this new resin if you request it at b9c.com/samples, and we can get that to you ASAP. Well, without further ado, thank you again. We really appreciate everybody showing up, and yeah, we'll see you next time.